Alma Renfroe hung a real store-bought door on her sod house so the land office would call it a house. The spring morning she rode in to prove she had lived 5 years on her own quarter section, not one man on Dry Willow Creek would put his name to a paper saying he'd seen her do it. She did not argue at the counter. She just folded her gloves and waited. The reason stood outside. Emmett Doss's bar-cross cattle had grazed that 160 acres free for years. An open quarter is worth more than an honest neighbor. A woman can't hold ground she can't defend, Doss told the store, and 4 men studied their boots. But on the land office counter, Alma had read one line on the printed final proof form. A single word. A word the men swearing against her had never once bothered to read. If you've ever been ruled out by a room instead of a rule, this story is for you. Before we go on, do me one small thing. Subscribe and comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this creek runs. Now, let me take you back to the grass. Ferris County, Nebraska, spring of 1879. The wind came off the flatland the way it always did. Steady, low, smelling of wet sod and cold iron. Alma Renfroe was 41 years old. She had filed her entry on 160 acres of Dry Willow Creek back in 1874. Her husband filed beside her. He meant to break the whole quarter that first year. He died of fever the second winter. She buried him under a cottonwood at the north line and she stayed. That is the part the men on the creek like to forget. She stayed. 5 winters now. She had proved up alone, and under the Homestead Act she had every right to. The law said so plain. It said the ground could go to any person who is the head of a family, or who has arrived at the age of 21 years. She was both. She was head of what was left of her family, and she was long past 21, and she had read that line so many times the paper had gone soft at the fold. Her house was 12 feet by 14. Sod brick, cut from her own ground, stacked and chinked, and roofed. But a soddy alone would not satisfy the register. A dwelling had to be a real house. A door. A window. A roof that held. So Alma had done a thing the creek laughed about. She drove the wagon 2 days to the rail town, and she bought a door. A real milled door, pine, with a store-bought iron latch that clicked when it caught. She bought a single pane of glass wrapped in a horse blanket, and she carried it home across her lap like a sleeping child. She hung the door in the sod wall. She cut the window and set the glass. And every single night of those 5 years, she slept behind that door. She meant to be able to swear she had. She meant it to be true before it was ever sworn. Now the 5 years were up. Now she needed only to prove it. And proving it, it turned out, needed men. 2 witnesses. That was the rule as everyone told it to her. 2 witnesses who had seen the dwelling with their own eyes, seen the field she broke, seen her living on the land. Their word, sworn, would finish the proof and turn the entry into a patent. A patent was the deed. The deed was hers forever. So she went asking. She rode first to Ab Teague. Teague's stock, bar-cross fed, crossed her quarter most mornings to reach the water. He had seen her soddy 1,000 times. He had seen the smoke off her chimney and the door she hung. She sat her horse in his yard and asked him plain, would he come to Ashfork and swear he'd seen her live on the creek? Teague looked at the dirt. He rubbed the back of his neck. I can't rightly recall, he said, who lives where out on that grass. She did not raise her voice. She thanked him. She rode on. She went to Marion Priest next. Priest was a fence mender, a quiet man, not a Doss man exactly, but a careful one. He heard her out at his gate. He did not pretend he'd forgotten. He just shook his head slow. I won't cross Doss, he said. That's the size of it, Alma? I got my own to think of. 2 asked. 2 refused. And the second one at least had the decency to name why. She rode into Ashfork that week to buy the forms. A young clerk behind the counter slid the printed final proof and testimony sheet across the wood. He barely looked up. "Fill that out," he said, "and bring your 2 men." Bring your 2 men. She heard it as law. Everyone said it that way. She folded the form into her coat without reading it, and she rode home with the phrase sitting on her chest like a stone. The creek talked, the way a creek does. Doss's men made a joke of the door. "A soddy with a bought door," they said, "was a lady playing house on grass we've grazed 10 years. They said it in the store, and they said it at the water, and it got back to her the way such things always do. The one thing she'd bought with her own coin to make her home count in the eyes of the law, and they'd turned it into a punchline. She let it ride. She was not a woman who spent herself on jokes. But the asking had to go on, and there were only so many men on the creek, and every one of them either grazed bar-cross cattle or feared the man who owned them, which is how it came to the store. There is a moment in every hard road where you stop asking one door at a time and you stand in the middle of the room and ask them all at once. Alma reached hers on a Saturday when the general store was full. Homesteaders and hands, women at the dry goods, men at the stove. She stepped into the middle of that warm, crowded, murmuring room, and she raised her voice just enough to carry. "I need 2 men," she said, "who have seen me live on Dry Willow Creek. That's all. 2 who'll come to Ashfork and swear they saw my house and my field and me living in it. I've been there 5 years. Some of you have watered stock on my ground every morning of it. I'm asking any 2 of you to say so." The room went quiet. Not a shocked quiet. A guilty one. The particular silence of men who have already decided. Boots shifted on plank floor. A woman near the flour set down her scoop. Nobody spoke. And then Emmett Doss, by the stove warming his hands, said the thing he'd been saving. "A woman can't hold ground she can't defend." He didn't even look at her when he said it. He said it to the room. Easy, like a man remarking on the weather. And the grazing men, every one of them, looked away. Teague at the window. Priest at his hat. 4, 5, 6 men turning their faces from a widow in the middle of a store because a cattleman had told them where the line was. Alma waited 3 full seconds, long enough to see that not one mouth would open. Then she gathered her coat, and she walked out. She did not slam the store-bought echo of a door behind her. She closed it soft. The whole county had refused her, in public, out loud, and had put not one word of it in writing. That was the thing she carried home in the dark. Nothing was written. There was nothing to appeal. You cannot fight a silence. You cannot take a shrug to a judge. She thought that was the bottom. It wasn't. Doss had one more move, and he made it inside the week. A writer brought the paper out to her soddy on a gray afternoon. Official, stamped, Emmett Doss had filed a formal contest against her entry at the Ashfork District Land Office. Abandonment, it said. Failure to improve. He was telling the government she did not live there and never had. A hearing was set. 30 days out. If she lost, the quarter opened. Back to grass. Back to bar cross. And Doss, generous man, sent word with the writer of a way to skip the whole ugly business. He'd buy her out. $80. Cash. And she could walk. Her alternative, if she wanted to keep it clean and commute the claim outright, was $200 she did not have, $1.25 an acre for 160 acres, and she could no more raise $200 than she could raise the dead man under the cottonwood. $80 to quit. $200 to buy her own life outright, or 30 days to make men swear who would not swear. She sat up that night with the lamp low. She did not cry. She had done her crying 2 winters into widowhood and found it changed nothing. Instead, she reached into her coat and she took out the printed form, the one the clerk had handed her, the one she'd folded away unread because a boy behind a counter had told her what it said. She unfolded it on the table and she smoothed it flat with both hands, and for the first time, in her own lamplight, with a contest hanging over her and 30 days to live, Alma Renfroe began to read the thing herself, line by line, word by word, the way she should have read it the first day. She got partway down the page. Her finger stopped. She went back and read the line again. Then a third time. Then she sat very still, and the lamp guttered, and somewhere out past the store-bought door her broken field lay quiet under the stars, and the word on the paper was not the word the whole creek had been saying to her for 5 years. The form said witnesses. Not men. Not 2 men. Not 2 male freeholders of the county. Witnesses. She read the relevant statute next morning. She rode the 2 miles to Hetty Voss's claim before breakfast, and borrowed Hetty's copy of the Homestead Act, the one Hetty kept pressed flat under a flat-iron because paper curled in a sod house, and she sat at Hetty's table with Hetty's coffee going cold beside her, and she read it the same way. Any person, head of a family, or 21 years of age. She qualified on both lines. The act described her entry, her improvements, her 5 winters, and when it came to the final proof, the witnesses it required were witnesses. The word had no modifier, no appendage, no footnote restricting the category to a particular kind of human being. The county had told her that rule for 5 years. The clerk had told her. The men at the store had told her with their boots and their silence. Emmett Doss had told her from a position of such confidence that he had not bothered to look at the form himself. Nobody had written it down, because it was not there. She set the statute flat on the table and held her coffee with both hands and stared at the window of Hetty Voss's soddy, which was a real window with real glass in it, the same as her own, and she understood something that made her stomach go quiet and cold, and then, slowly, something else entirely. The discrimination had no clause. It was only ever a room agreeing with itself out loud, which meant there was nothing to appeal, nothing to argue, nothing to petition away, and also nothing to stop her from walking past it, because the door, when she finally looked at it straight, had never been locked. The sign on it was not a law. It was a habit, and habits live in the mouths of men, and men had kept their mouths shut at a critical moment. Hetty was watching her across the table. Alma put down the cup. She said, "Who saw me live there?" Hetty said nothing for a moment. Outside, one of her chickens made a noise about something. "You know who," Hetty said. "I need to hear you say it." Hetty folded her hands. She was a compact, weathered woman, 51 years old, a widow herself, her own claim filed 2 years before Alma's, her own 5 winters behind her, and a 6th coming. She had crossed Alma's quarter 100 times in all weather. She had helped Alma hang that door. She had been standing in the broken field the morning Alma got the fever news about her husband, and had said nothing and stayed anyway, which was the most useful thing anyone had said or done. "I saw you," Hetty said. "I saw the door. I saw the window. I saw your chimney every winter morning for 5 years. I saw the field broken and planted and broken again. I can say what I saw, if the form allows it." "The form says witnesses," Alma said. "It does not say anything else." Hetty was quiet. Then she said, "Doss will graze me out." Alma did not lie to her. He might try. Hetty looked at her hands. Outside, the chicken had resolved whatever dispute it had with the morning. The silence in the soddy was the kind that precedes a decision, not the kind that follows one. "I'll go," Hetty said finally. "I'll go, and I'll say what I saw, which is the truth. And he can do what he wants after." Alma nodded. She reached across and pressed Hetty's hands once, and then let go, because Hetty was not a woman who needed holding up, only a woman who needed to be asked properly. The second witness was 3 miles east at the schoolhouse on the ridge above the creek flat. Josie Lark taught the county's children 5 days a week and boarded Monday through Friday in the Mackey farmstead, which sat at an angle on a shallow rise from which, on any clear morning, You could see Alma's soddy door and the smoke coming off her stovepipe against the pale sky. Josie was 24. She had been there 2 years. She had watched Alma's chimney smoke every single school day morning from the window she stood at to drink her own coffee before the children arrived. Alma found her at the schoolhouse after the children had gone home, washing the slate board down with a damp cloth. She listened to Alma with the cloth in her hand and her back still half turned to the room, and when Alma finished, Josie turned around and she said, "I'm not married. I don't own land. I'm not sure my word is the kind they take." "The form says witnesses," Alma said again. It was going to be what she said from now until the hearing. It says who, not what kind. What if Halloran won't allow it? Then he'll have to explain which word in the statute stops him. He'll have to find it and read it aloud in a room and put his name to it. And I don't believe he can, because I've read it, and it isn't there. Josie set the cloth on the edge of the chalk tray. She was quiet in the way young people are quiet when they are deciding whether to be brave, which looks from the outside like hesitation but is actually something more like measuring. Then she picked the cloth back up. She hung it on its nail. And she said, "I've watched your smoke every morning for 2 years. If they won't take that, then they don't want the truth. They want a man." She looked at Alma. "Tell me where to stand." That was the whole of it. 2 women. 2 names. Word of the hearing ran ahead of the day, the way things do on a creek. Doss did not hide his certainty. He told the room at the general store that the matter was already settled. "No man on the creek will speak for her," he said. And he said it like a door swinging shut. The men who grazed his cattle nodded along. They believed him. They believed it because it had always been true. None of them thought to ask who would speak for her instead. That was the joke none of them heard. Alma heard it every night. She sat at her table under the lamp, and she almost laughed, alone, at the size of what they had missed. They had guarded the front gate so hard they never looked at the fence. The men were never going to be her witnesses. They had ruled themselves out, and in ruling themselves out, they had made room for the 2 people who had actually watched her live. The 30 days ran down. She spent the last evenings with Hetty and with Josie, going over the plain facts a register would ask for. Not arguments. Facts. The soddy was 12 feet by 14. The door was store-bought pine with an iron latch. The window was 1 pane of glass set in a horse blanket. She had broken sod the first spring and cropped it every year after. She had slept under that roof every night for 5 winters, the second of them the one that took her husband. "Just tell him what your eyes saw," Alma said. "That's all it is. That's all it ever was." Josie's hands shook the night before. She admitted it plain. "What if I stand up and my voice quits?" "Then you wait," Hetty said, "and it'll come back. Mine always does." She poured the girl more coffee. She did not baby her. That was the kindest thing she could have done. The Ashfork land office was a long room with a rail across the middle and a stove that smoked. Doss came in with a lawyer from the county seat, a narrow man in a good coat who carried his papers like a winning hand. They sat at the front. They looked comfortable. Doss leaned back and let his eyes travel over the benches, counting the men who had come to watch, sure every one of them was his. Cole Halloran took the receiver's chair. He was the same literalist who had let his clerk hand Alma a form without reading it to her, a by-the-letter man. Alma knew now that the letter could cut 2 ways. She had come to bet her land on it. The lawyer opened. He spoke of abandonment. He spoke of an unimproved quarter and an entrywoman who could bring no corroboration. "The claimant," he said, "cannot produce a single witness from among the men of Dry Willow Creek. Ask yourself why." "I'll produce 2 witnesses," Alma said. The room turned. Doss smiled, because he thought he knew every man on that creek and knew not one would rise. Alma said, "My witnesses will stand now." Hetty Voss stood. and beside her, a breath later, Josie Lark stood. 2 women. In their good dresses, in a room full of men. The lawyer was on his feet before they had fully risen. Objection. This corroboration is defective on its face. These are women. One a widow. One an unmarried girl who owns no land. The statute contemplates. Show me where, Alma said. The room went quiet. The statute contemplates, the lawyer said again, and stopped, because he had reached for the word, and the word was not there. Halloran raised one hand. He did not look at Doss. He did not look at the lawyer. He reached across his own desk and drew the printed final proof and testimony sheet toward him, the same sheet a clerk had folded into Alma's coat weeks before. He ran one finger down it, line by line. His lips moved. Then, he took up the bound copy of the act at his elbow, the same words Hetty kept pressed flat under a flatiron in her soddy, and he ran his finger down that too. The whole room waited on a man reading. The form, Halloran said at last, asks for 2 witnesses. He set his finger on the line. It asks that they have personal knowledge of the residence and the improvements. It does not. He turned the page, then turned it back. It does not once say the witnesses shall be men. Mr. Halloran, the lawyer began. The act says any person, Halloran said. It does not modify the witness. He looked up. His face had not changed at all. That was the thing about a literal man. He would sink you on a word, and he would save you on the same word and feel nothing either way. I find no bar. The witnesses may be sworn. Doss sat forward. Alma said nothing. She had said her one line, and the room had done the rest. Hetty took the oath first. Her hand did not shake. She had buried a husband and held her own ground, and she was not going to be undone by a smoky room. She swore she had seen the door hung, the real pine door with the iron latch. She had helped hang it herself. She swore she had seen the pane of glass in the window. She swore she had seen the field broken and cropped, 5 springs running. And she swore she had seen Alma Renfroe living in that soddy through 5 winters, the hard ones and the mild, because her own claim was 2 miles off, and Alma's smoke was the first sign of morning she looked for. Then, Josie. Her voice did quit. Once, on the first word. She waited. It came back, the way Hetty said it would. She swore she boarded at the Mackey place, 3 miles east, in sight of Alma's door. She swore that for 2 years, every school day morning, she had stood at her window with her coffee and watched the smoke come off Alma's stovepipe against the pale sky. You cannot make smoke in an empty house, she said, which no one had told her to say. Somebody was in it. Every morning, it was her. Corroboration, on the record, sworn and taken down, the very thing no man on the creek would give, given plain by 2 women in an open room. Halloran turned to Alma and asked the habitability questions in his flat voice. The dimensions. She answered, 12 by 14. The door. A bought door, iron latch. The window. 1 pane, set in a blanket, whether she had slept in it. Every night for 5 years. He wrote as she spoke. Her sworn word and their sworn word met on the page and closed like a hand. The proof is sufficient. Halloran said, the residence and cultivation are corroborated. A proven-up entry cannot be abandoned. The contest is dismissed. Doss came half out of his chair. The courthouse, he said, and his voice was rough, never once said her name. Not in 5 years. Not one man, a patent, Halloran said, not even looking up from his writing, is the county saying her name in its own hand. Forever, that is all a patent is. He dipped his pen. It will say it now. Doss stood there a moment with nothing to answer. Then, he took up his hat. Behind him, along the benches, the grazing men were working it out slow. Ab Teague, who could not rightly recall. Marion Priest, who would not cross Doss. They had kept their silence to keep the quarter open, to keep the free grass free. Alma watched it land on their faces one at a time. A proven-up claim is fenced lawful private land. The open range across her 160 acres had just closed. They had shut it themselves, with their silence, because not one of them had ever bothered to read the form either. The thing their silence was meant to protect was the very thing their silence had lost. Alma carried the papers to the county recorder's counter herself. She paid the lawful proof fee. Not the $200 to commute. Not Doss's $80 to quit. The plain fee the law asked, and no more. She stood at the rail and watched a man take up his pen and write Alma Renfroe into the county book. The same book. The same ink. The same steady hand that would have written a man's name without a second thought. She watched every letter. Nobody was going to hand it to her folded and unread again. 6 months on, the field off Dry Willow Creek came up green. The sod she had broken alone lay in even rows. The soddy door stood open to the warm air, the store-bought door they had laughed at. The lady playing house on grass they'd grazed 10 years. Nailed to the inside of it, where she could see it from her table by lamplight, was the recorded patent. Her name, in the county's own hand. Hetty's claim sat untroubled 2 miles off. Doss had grazed no cattle across it. A man who has been beaten on the letter of a form grows careful about the letter of everything. And at the schoolhouse on the ridge, Josie Lark taught the county's girls to read. Not just their primers. She taught them to take a printed form and go down it line by line, with a finger, the way Halloran had, and to find the word that was there and the word that was not. Alma set her one dry thing to the empty air of it, the only bitterness she let herself keep. They wouldn't write the reason down, she said. So there was nothing for me to argue. Only the reason they left out. That was the whole trick of it. The rule that keeps you out is easy to fight when it's written on the wall. You point at it, you read it aloud, you put your name against it. But the rule nobody writes down. The silence at a counter, the men studying their boots, the certainty that a woman can't hold ground she can't defend, that one has no clause to appeal. It only works as long as you believe it's the law. She had stopped believing it under a lamp, alone, reading a form the men swearing against her had never once read themselves. That's where she'd found it. Not in a fight. In a single word on a printed page. Witnesses. Never men. If you've ever been ruled out by a room instead of a rule, comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this creek runs.